it's always a little bit of embarrassing when you're praised like this, because I'm very much aware of the fact that in fact there are several people in the audience, in the digital audience, that would be much more qualified to speak on this topic than I am. But I'll do my best to get the discussion going. Signs of the times, or should we rather speak of signs of old times? The second coming is one of the key doctrines of the Christian church. In many of the documents of the church, for instance, the Apostles' Creed, the second coming is highlighted. The church has always asserted that we believe in Jesus Christ, and then it says a number of things about Jesus Christ, but he ascended to heaven and is seated at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty, to judge the living and the dead. It's also one of the core doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And you all know the fundamental beliefs by heart, so you know what the fundamental belief number 25 is. The second coming of Christ is the blessed hope of the church, the grand climax of the gospel, the almost complete fulfillment of most lines of prophecy, together with the present condition of the world, indicates that Christ's coming is near. The time of the event has not been revealed, and we are therefore exhorted to be ready at all times. The second coming of Christ, one of the core doctrines of our denomination. With the second coming of Christ, we have usually especially emphasized the signs preceding the second coming. And all of you know probably that there is a series of things that usually are highlighted when it comes to the signs of Christ's coming. Wars and rumors of wars, signs in politics and in the government of the world, the expectation that one day there will be a world government. On the other hand, that nations will not cling together, and we have heard that in particular in Europe with the European Union, that ultimately it will be unsuccessful. That's the message that we have been giving, because they will not cling together, the nations, as Daniel 2 predicts. Natural disasters, pandemics, famines, earthquakes, and then, of course, the signs in the spiritual world. The power of Roman Catholicism, the role of apostate Protestantism, New Age spiritualism, and then the danger of ecumenism. Immorality, it will be like the days of Noah, but then there is also this marvelous sign of the spreading of the gospel worldwide, because once that has happened, then Christ can come. This is the list that is more or less common in traditional Adventist preaching. But I wonder, and that's what probably can be highlighted in the discussion that we are going to have, I wonder whether there are a couple of questions that we could ask. Should we perhaps reconsider our emphasis on some of the aspects of Christ's second coming? For instance, has there not been too much emphasis on time, even to the point that we have had quite a bit of time setting, which is a temptation which continues, in particular at the right fringe of the church? But also we have heard over and over again when we had a general conference session that we were told, well, this is probably going to be the last time that we are going to be together as a world church, because Christ will come before another 5 years have passed. Even though we say that, we probably have already rented the location for the next general conference and even for the one after that. Well, there has always been the temptation of having a very detailed end time scenario. And I think Lauren and the Ministry of Adventist today has tried hard to do something about that. Maybe we should have a different emphasis. There is the obsession with the problem of delay. Why has Christ not come? And there is, of course, the danger of the last generation theology, LGT, the idea that there must be a group of perfect people before Christ can come. So these are some of the things that maybe we need to reconsider. Today, I would like in particular to talk about what is the time of the end? What are signs? Can we not place these terms in a somewhat broader context than we sometimes have done? And then next week, the question will be, should we not be more careful in connecting prophecies and particular signs with specific historical events? And then 2 weeks from now, will we, Seventh-day Adventists, ever succeed in communicating the gospel to every human being on earth? Considering the fact that even today, about 300,000 new people have been born into this world. Are we ever going to be able to finish the gospel commission? First of all, when is the time of the end? Traditional Seventh-day Adventist view has been that the time of the end came at about the time of the about the time of the French Revolution. It was after the 1260 days or years that ended in 1798. Is that traditional view correct, or is it at most one-sided? Did the time of the end perhaps begin in New Testament times? And would it be more correct to say that the time of the end is the intermezzo between Christ's first and second coming? There are a number of texts that seem to indicate that seem to point in that direction. When Peter was giving his sermon on the day of Pentecost, he quoted the prophecy of Joel, and the prophet Joel was talking about things that would happen in the last days, just before the great and awful day of the Lord would happen. And he says that is now fulfilled. These last days have now come. In the Hebrews 9, we read that Christ appeared at the end of the ages. Apparently, that is when Christ was on earth 2,000 years ago. It was part of the end of the ages. The beginning of the the book of Hebrews, it starts, Christ has spoken to us through Christ in these last days. Again, 2,000 years ago. Peter emphasizing the same thing. Christ is revealed to us in these last days. So there are a number of texts, and there are more, that indicate that actually the time of the end began when Christ ascended to heaven. When we talk about signs, that's another important term. New Testament has 3 word groups that relate to signs, miracles, wonders, the words dynamis, semeion, and teras, and they are to a large extent equivalent to the Hebrew terms that you see on the screen. Now, these words, they may or may not point to supernatural events. And that is something I think we need to keep in mind. The word teras is more often than the other terms used with the special meaning of portent, a signal pointing to something that is yet to come. There are all kinds of signs in Scripture, and I've just listed a few of them here. Genesis 4:15, after Cain had murdered his brother, God said that he would give Cain a sign that would protect him. Well, it's very difficult to know exactly what that sign was. The book of Genesis is not specific. The best known sign that God gave is probably the rainbow of the covenant. But there are other signs listed: blood on the doorpost at Easter, at Pascha, the Sabbath as a sign of the covenant between God and us. Even a person can be a sign, as Isaiah was. Jesus speaks about and does signs and wonders, and so do the apostles. There are signs all over the place, and there are different kinds of signs. But I would like to, in particular, point to a piece of scripture in 1 Samuel. Samuel receives signs as he goes along the road to Gibeah. You may know the story, and I hope you do, and if not, it's worth reading it. 1 Samuel 10, that Saul receives signs along the road to Gibeah. He visits, first of all, Samuel. Why? Because he goes to the seer to find out where the donkeys are that his father has lost. And while he is there visiting Samuel, he is anointed king, because Samuel has seen that Saul would come to him, and God had told him to anoint him king. And then the prophet, the seer, sends Saul on to his way to Gibeah. But he says, as you go along to this destination, there are a number of signs that you are on the right track, signs that you are on the way to your destination. 2 men will come to you when you are near a particular spot, and you will receive confirmation from them that the donkeys have found their way home. And then a little further, you come to a particular spot, and there 3 men with loaves of bread and 2 or 3 young goats and a quantity of wine. They will come to you and they will give you some of these breads. And then continuing, you come near a Philistine outpost, and there you will meet a group of ecstatic prophets. And these events happened as Saul was traveling to his destination. They confirmed that Saul was on the right track. Now, it's not sure whether others than Saul did perceive these things that happened as signs. But for Saul, they were signs. Yes, I'm on the right track. I'm getting to my destination. And I think this is, for me, some kind of seminal meaning of what a sign is and what a sign does. Signs tell us we're on the right track. We'll get there to our destination eventually. What is a sign? As I said, did the others who were with Saul, did they consider these signs to be these events as signs, as something specific? Professor Berkouwer, he's a famous Dutch theologian. He said, only when signs are seen through the eyes of faith can they display their meaning and significance. So events become signs in the eye of the beholder. For others, they may be just events happening. For those who look at them with the eyes of faith, they have meaning and significance. And this is also agreed by Richard Rice in his book, Reign of God. The signs are not just signs to anyone, he says. One has to see them from the proper perspective in order to grasp their true meaning. And specifically, we need faith to see that the end is near. The signs corroborate and strengthen the faith, as well as boost the confidence that the end will come soon. But also, it's in the eye of the beholder. And this is also something Jesus emphasizes. We read in Matthew 16, one day, the Pharisees and Sadducees came to test Jesus, demanding that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. But then Jesus says, well, signs are not enough. You need interpretation. You need to see what they mean, because he replied, you know the saying, red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow. Red sky in the morning means foul weather at day, all day. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times. So it's in the eye of the beholder. The classic chapters about the signs are Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. But we usually go to Matthew 24 and not to the parallel chapters. The setting is that Jesus predicts the destruction of Jerusalem. They're looking out over the city, and Jesus says, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left here, one upon the other. Every one will be thrown down. And then the disciples come with this famous question, now tell us, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? When will this happen? When will Jerusalem be destroyed? And what will be the sign of your coming? And then Jesus says, these are the signs. Signs will precede both events. Signs will precede the destruction of Jerusalem, and signs will precede the final events. And he does not differentiate between what happens before 70 AD and what will happen towards the end. And we know that Matthew 24 emphasizes for 6 wars and rumors of wars, for 7 famines and earthquakes in various places, goes on with false prophets and an increase of wickedness. And then a little further down in the chapter, Christ speaks about false Christs and false prophets who will appear and perform great signs and miracles. And then he speaks about the days of Noah. and the immorality that was then current. It's only in the parallel chapter in Luke that mention is made of pestilences. In Matthew 24 and Mark 13, that is not mentioned, but it's there in Luke 21. When we look at history, we can say that signs preceded 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem, like Christ predicted. There were prophets and men who claimed to be the Messiah. There were earthquakes in the Holy Land. There is a fault line through the Jordan River, and there is often earthquakes, volcanic activity. Around the year 64, there was a politically very unstable period. Wars, rumors of wars. A number of Roman provinces revolted against the central power of the empire. Acts refers to a famine, we're told, in the entire Roman world. That was at the time of Emperor Claudius, from around 44 to 48, he was the emperor. Many Christians in those decades prior to 70 were persecuted, martyred. Wickedness increased. Jewish gangs, as for instance, Sicarii, went around robbing and murdering people. And in a way, we can say that by the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, the gospel had been preached, Colossians says, in all the known world. And all over the world, the gospel was bearing fruit. So the entire world meant, that expression meant something different in the first century than it meant today. But we can see a clear fulfillment of the words of Jesus Christ. Signs. Through the ages, people have talked and have seen signs. In some periods, the expectancy was particularly strong. And often it was said, now the time has come. It's almost there, or soon. And there were often excesses at these times of expectancy, millennial dreams, heliastic ideas, that is a temporal empire, a temporal kingdom to be established on earth. And Seventh-day Adventists, of course, are particularly interested in the signs that were seen and talked about in the 19th century and beyond. First of all, in the awakenings that took place in much of the world, emphasis on the second coming, prophecies, signs, etc. In the early Middle Ages, I'm just giving now some examples of the expectation throughout history. One example, early Middle Ages, Pope Gregory the Great, that is early 7th century. He preached about the presence of the signs in his time. And in one of his homilies, he said, the time is now. And mind you, that is at the end of the 6th century, that we see that nations stand up against nations, that they be oppressed with anguish on the earth. We observe it more in our time than we read in the books. That an earthquake has ruined innumerable cities. You know how often we have heard it from other parts of the world. Epidemics, we suffer constantly. Here is a voice from very early on that says, you know, all these signs that we have been talking about, that Christ has been talking about, they are being fulfilled before our very eyes. in the Middle Ages, later Middle Ages, there were often millennial expectations. Often they were quite material. There was lots of talk about the Antichrist, and the Pope was often identified as the Antichrist. When we have the great schism between the Church of the East and the Church of the West, we see that many people are talking about apocalyptic signs. Something is happening and the end is near. And in the 14th century, at the time of the Black Death, there was a lot of talk also about the signs of the times, the pestilences that were now happening and were indicating that time was running out. As we continue, and it's just a few examples, Martin Luther, he pointed out that the signs of Christ's coming are by and large quite mundane. They may be predictable in ordinary eclipses, but they're signs nonetheless. And he once remarked that the whole book could be filled with the signs happening in our days that are pointing to the approaching end of the world. Luther was convinced, and sometimes even guessing some dates, or at least approximate dates, when Christ would come. When we come later on, and we come to the Millerites, for instance, and just one Millerite voice, Dr. Henry Dana Ward, an Episcopal clergyman, he became a leading figure in the Millerite movement. And he comments on the falling of the stars, the meteoric showers in 1833. We felt in our hearts that it was a sign of the last day, for truly the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig casts her untimely figs when she is shaken by a mighty wind. And so he talks about these signs of the times that are being fulfilled in his very time. The Millerites, early Adventists, they pointed to the fact that Christ had said that immediately after the distress of those days, and they interpreted the distress of those days as the 1260 days, that is years, that had just ended. And the text said, after that distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its lights, the stars will fall from heaven, and heavenly bodies will be shaken. And they pointed also to the opening of the sixth seal in the Revelation, where it says there was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth as figs drop from a tree when shaken by a strong wind. Well, they said, we live now immediately after the distress. And so what do we see? Well, there was an enormous earthquake, and they point to the earthquake of 1755, earthquake in Lisbon, Portugal. In 6 minutes, the entire center of the city of Lisbon was destroyed, and maybe 60,000 or maybe even as many as 100,000 people died. And we're told that the coast of Portugal was battered by very high waves, and that the earthquake was even felt as far away as in Scandinavia and North Africa, and even as far away as in the Caribbean. Now, it so happened that it was November 1, All Saints' Day. And for Protestants in Europe, that was a clear sign that God was punishing the Roman Catholics. They were in large numbers in the churches in Lisbon, and many died as these churches tumbled down. The great earthquake in Lisbon. The sun was going to be darkened, and lo and behold, an intense darkness, May 1978, major part of the eastern states. There was a phenomenon that is now known as the dark day. And we have all read stories about that. And I've quoted here from a journal: the dark day inspired terror, panic, and puzzlement. Men prayed and women wept. Thousands left off work and took to taverns and churches for solace. Children were sent home from school, and so on. A dark day. Then 1834, falling of the stars, meteorites all over the skies. And that convinced many that they were witnessing also a fulfillment of the words of Christ, that the stars would fall from heaven. Most people did not realize that it was actually a phenomenon that occurs about every 33 years. Ellen White spoke about these signs. And, well, I'm not going to read the whole quotation, but everything in the world is in agitation. The signs of the times are ominous. Coming events cast their shadows before, etc. An intensity such as never before is seen taking possession of the world. And she speaks about various signs. She says, yeah, it's happening now. God is speaking to us. He bids us come apart and come and commune with him, because it's going to happen very, very soon. And not only Ellen White, but also many other voices. And here we could quote from a stream of articles and books. So happens that in the past week, I've been reading a biography of G.N. Loughborough. And I read about one of his books, Last Day Tokens, that he wrote in 1904. And it's not currently in print. In fact, it's been out of print for a long time because it was a bit of a funny book. And in chapter 6, I've just quoted here a few things from the table of content, that there were many signs, he said, in the moon, and there were crosses seen in the sky, rainbow arcs, and well, actually, here are listed a number of the things that he saw that people had seen in the moon, but also other phenomena in the skies, a whole list of them. And he says they are all fulfillments of what Christ predicted, and they show us that the coming of Christ is very soon. A very popular book was the book by James Edson White, the youngest son of Ellen and James. That was reprinted in 1938, and that edition was very popular also in Europe in various languages. I know it also appeared in Dutch, and there much is made of the Spanish flu as the most decimating pestilence in all of history. If there ever was any sign of the soon coming, this was it. Spanish flu, 100 years ago. If there ever was a sign of the second coming, the soon coming, this was it. Here's an illustration from an article in the Review and Herald by F.M. Wilcox. And you see there all the important signs that were mentioned in the articles and books of Adventist writers. They are mentioned. And there are many of these things that that we recognize. You see, point number 9, scoffers. You know, and when there were people who said that all of this was nonsense, then of course that was in itself a fulfillment of the prophecy of Peter 3, verse 3 and 4. But as time goes on, and here I come in the time when I was a child, the 1950s, I saw in Adventist journals in our country books, articles about the marvels of technology. And here, a sewing machine, one of the great marvels of technology, showing that the time of the end is really about to come. And the picture to the right, you know, television, this invention, surely that was a fulfillment of knowledge being increased, as we read in the book of Daniel. As the 20th century went on, we talked about science, the Eastern question, the role of Turkey, 2 world wars, the Holocaust, atomic bomb, and all the other things that are listed here. You name it, they were listed as the signs of the soon coming. And now in our time, well, we talk about the tsunami, 2004, on, I think it was Boxing Day of that year, when there was this terrible disaster. For some people, climate change is surely a sign of the time. Well, others, of course, wonder whether there is something like climate change or whether that is just fake news. But if you want to talk about wars, there's plenty of wars. Wars in Yemen, wars in Syria, etc. Social injustice, religious developments that show that the end is near. Immorality, well, even today, there was quite a bit on Dutch television about Epstein and Prince Andrew. And well, that's surely, some people would say, a sign of the time, this kind of immorality. Technology, well, we are surprised about the James Webb telescope that has just been launched. Certainly, that is much more advanced technology than the sewing machine that I just showed. But then we live in a different time. Signs of the times. Many questions ask themselves, is COVID a sign? Yes, I think we can say it is a sign, like the pandemics in early centuries, like Black Death was a sign, like Spanish flu was a sign. But it may not be the last pandemic. And it is probably not the sign par excellence. And we must sound a warning against speculation and conspiracy theories. And well, I saw this little picture. You've got to stop thinking that every sound you hear is a bear. So we should be careful not to think that this is the sign. The time aspect, I believe, is not the most important thing when we speak about signs. And we know we cannot predict the time of the coming, the hour, the day, the year, maybe the decade or the century remain unknown. But be prepared. It could be tomorrow. Be active, Jesus said, until I come. But if everything is a sign, then really nothing is a sign. I believe the most important thing that we can say about signs is that they tell us things are moving in a particular direction. History is moving to a climax. There were signs along the road, as there were for Saul when he was traveling to Gibeah, that indicate, yes, you're on the right track. Do not be afraid. I'm with you. Your salvation draweth nigh. There have been signposts. There have been signs along the route of God's people during the past 2,000 years. And when people saw some of these things that we mentioned as signs, we may have the inclination to smile and say, well, of course, they didn't know any better. Yes, these were signs for the people who lived in those days. They recognized them as pointing in a certain direction. And signs continue to point to the end of history. We are on our way towards the consummation of history. Signs have been relevant for every generation, and they are relevant for today. All signs, all through the centuries, have been pointing to the sign of the Son of Man, the coming of Christ, and the gathering of the elect.
Thank you, Reinder. I appreciate your presentation. This is the time when we go to comments. As I've mentioned before, you can raise your hand by going to the bottom of your screen. There's a button called Reactions that allows you to raise your hand. And we'll take your comments in the order that they come in. Something that has kind of captured my imagination, I guess you'd say, is the distinction between our own timelines and the timeline of God. The timeline of God who lives for eternity. And the timeline, I think it talks in James about man's life being a flower that comes up in the morning and dies in the evening. Mm-hmm. The timeline being very different for humans than it is for God. And I think sometimes maybe we try to put God on our own timeline when his is very different from ours. And when you were talking about the sewing machine being the greatest technology that was coming out in the 50s, it kind of, now that we have the internet and Zoom meetings and all these crazy things we have now, you think that that was always out there. We just hadn't found it yet. This information, it kind of puts our own brains in perspective of really how much we're using and how much we're capable of and how things move in a continuum. And how does that play into God's hand? Just some thoughts I have. I'm still waiting for a chat here. Lauren, would you like to unmute yourself, or maybe you're already unmuted, and give us a thought or two?
When Dr. Bruinsma was talking about the dark day in May 19th, 1780, I remembered something that I had discovered a while back when I was researching this event. I had always kind of had the idea that, I guess growing up, that we were the only ones who noticed it, that we were the only ones who remembered it and made note of it. Well, it turns out that James Whitcomb Riley actually wrote a poem about it. And he wrote about the Connecticut legislature in session. And the Connecticut legislature was, there were people in the room who were rather alarmed as the day turned dark. I don't know if you know this story, Dr. Bruinsma.
But I like James Whitcomb Riley, so I'd be interested to hear it.
Yes. I've also noted that it was not just Adventists that noticed that.
Well, the head of the legislature, the speaker of the legislature, somebody stood up and said, "The day of judgment is here. I move we adjourn." And his name was Abraham Davenport, and Abraham Davenport said, and this was quoted in the record, and I love this line, and I think it's something we Adventists should remember. He said, "I am against adjournment. The day of judgment is either approaching or it is not. If it is not, there is no cause for adjournment. If it is, I choose to be found doing my duty. I wish, therefore, that candles may be brought.
Mhm.
Isn't that a great line?
Yeah.
If it is,
Mhm.
I want to be found doing my duty. The
Yeah.
other thing that I was thinking about, Reinder, is that there was a picture that was used repeatedly in the early part of the century. And it was used in many Adventist books. It was an etching, and it was engraved with modern inventions fulfilling prophecy. I have several copies of it in old books that I have. And these pictures were pictures of biplanes and steam engines and
Mhm.
dirigibles and Model T Fords. And you look at it now and you think, how it's such a reminder of how badly we misjudged the time and the signs of the times.
Mhm.
And it's a delightful picture, but also rather a sad one. Yes, David asked, was the Dark Day a large forest fire? It was a forest fire up in Ontario.
Mhm.
That's all.
Yes, it
I have
probably was a
Ed Reichsnyder.
combination. It was probably a combination of a forest fire, smoke, and fog that caused most of it. Yeah.
Hmm.
But nonetheless, and that is the
I've
point
asked-
I wanted to stress, these signs were real signs for the people in those days. They were confirming their faith in the coming of Jesus Christ. And so we should recognize them, not as not just saying, well, of course they didn't know any better, but for them, this was convincing. Christ was going to come. And these signs have helped people throughout the ages, I believe, to keep believing in the soon coming of Christ.
Ed Reichsnyder, you've unmuted. Can you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, it seems to me, this is just impressionistic, that Jesus spent, according to the Gospels, Jesus spent at least as much time talking about the kingdom of heaven now as he did talking about his coming. And I'm just working my way through the book. Probably most of you have already read it. I'm a little slow. The end of the scroll,
Mhm.
which is, as most of you know, a analysis of the development of the apocalyptic writings.
Mhm.
And of course, Jesus existed right in the middle of that period of apocalyptic writings. They started a couple of hundred years before him and went a couple of hundred years after him, roughly. And I'm wondering the extent to which, if we could discern divine reality, Jesus is more interested in us being all apocalyptic. We're now up to over 2,000 years worth of that. Or if he would be more interested in us trying to promote and develop and live the kingdom of heaven among you now. I wonder which is more important to him.
Mhm.
Reinder, would you like to respond to that? Or
Well,
react to it?
I think it's not a question of either or, but it's a question, I think, of two sides of one coin. Jesus certainly was interested in what would be coming, his kingdom, and everything becoming new, and people being resurrected and death no longer being there. So the future aspect, I think, is important in the New Testament, was important to Christ, was important to Paul. But at the same time, his concern with people around him was, if not primary, then at least concurrent. And there must be a balance, I think, in the way we deal also with the present and the future. And that balance has not always been there. It's not only social gospel. It's not only the apocalyptic. There are different things that we must keep in balance.
I'm going to ask Brian to unmute. Brian Ness, if you could share your feelings with us.
Yeah, I'm just going to relate maybe a personal story on my part as a scientist, because scientists, we sometimes get asked questions from people about the signs that are happening. And one that I remember very well at church, I had some older members of my church who'd contacted me and said, oh, aren't earthquakes increasing? I mean, that's a sign that Jesus is coming soon. And this was back in the 1990s at that time. And so, like every good scientist, I went and looked at the data just to see. And it turns out that in the 1990s, we actually had a lull in earthquakes worldwide. So I had to contact the person back and say, no, there's actually less than there has been over the long term. And that's not really a sign. Well, interestingly, in the last 20 years, if you go back to 2000, I actually have it on my phone here. I can show you the graph. I think I can get it on the screen there. You can see that's the frequency right there. And so back in around 2012, 2014, we had a spike in earthquakes for a while, and now we're on the downswing again. So it's one of those things that goes ups and downs. It goes up and down all the time. And then there's also been an upswing in small earthquakes, which interestingly enough, the current research on that is that it may be due to increased fracking. So and these are small, like around 2.0. So not major earthquakes. But I think sometimes we get obsessed with these kinds of things. And then if you actually look at the data, they don't turn out to be signs so much as we got fooled into thinking they're signs that are not really happening. And I could point to others, I'm sure. And I appreciate, Lauren, you bringing up the one about technology, because, boy, talk about technology. I mean, here's my computer, right, in my hand. So, and I don't know what sign that is, except that technology does, it gets better as time goes on, and it always has. So anyway, that just, to me, I think sometimes we get that there has been an Adventist obsession that is unhealthy, maybe even trying to put it on anything, and even COVID today, because that was mentioned. Some people point to COVID, or they point to climate change. And I wonder about climate change. I mean, that's human caused. So how is that a sign? I don't know. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth from a scientific perspective.
Well, with earthquakes, yes. I've also seen in statistics that actually they have not been going up, but going down in the last century or so. But then, when you talk about the earthquake in Lisbon, that was a catastrophe. But there have been earthquakes since in different parts of the world, in Asia, for instance, with many, many more victims. But nonetheless, I would think that the earthquake in Lisbon was a powerful sign for people who were living in those days. And so it was meaningful to them. Wars, sure, but if we look at the statistics now, there are fewer casualties from wars in the last 50 years or so than they have been for a long time. But nonetheless, wars that are happening we don't need to compare them with others, but wars that are happening, they are signs to us that something is wrong with this world. And the world is going in a certain direction, and there will be an end to what we consider as being wrong. But thank you very much for that comment about the earthquakes. Yeah.
I'm going to ask Austin Archer to unmute. Go ahead and share your thoughts with us, Austin.
Okay, thank you. What seems remarkable to me is that something that clearly Jesus intended as a means of increasing our faith can be, and in fact is being used, because it's because of the way that we apply it, is being used as a means that, if anything, reduces people's faith. By that I mean, if we think of these signs as roadblocks, I'm sorry, as road signs, clearly that can in fact be a way of increasing faith, of making us continue to look forward to Christ's coming. But the way we've used it, I think, is that we've used it as a means of predicting. And so I remember as a child growing up, every time there's something cataclysmic occurring or something that fits in with the Matthew discourse, people would raise my anxiety, certainly, and I'm sure the anxiety of lots of other people, by saying, well, Jesus, that means Jesus is coming, within a year, or, in fact, I remember a leader of one of our churches saying, well, it must be less than 2 years. And as a child, that put some fear into me. But I think we have tended to use this as a way of raising people's expectation of it being imminent, of it being, very soon. And when it doesn't happen, the result is that the next time people are less likely to be alarmed, but also less likely to take it seriously. So I wonder whether the focus shouldn't be simply seeing that as a reminder of Christ's promise that he will come, rather than the focus that we've tended to have of it being, next year or even next week or whatever, of its imminence rather than its certainty.
Yeah, well, I hope it has come through a little bit in my talk, that is exactly what I wanted to emphasize. And to take away some of this time element, this sign certainly is one of the signs that there's no doubt now it's going to happen, as you say, within 2 years or within a year or whatever. No, yes, there are signs happening also while in our lifetime, but we must be careful not to say these are the signs that it's happening next month or next year or even the next decade. Through the ages, well, I repeat myself, but there have been signs pointing in that direction. And yeah, we as Adventist believers in the 21st century, we can also discern that things are moving in a certain direction, and so that the second coming is going to happen. It is sure. And well, that is what I have tried to underline.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go to Dr. Hemmings, and Bob Martin, your hand was up and then down, and now you'll be up next after Dr. Hemmings, just to let you know. So I'm going to ask Dr. Hemmings to unmute, and if you could let us know what you're thinking this morning. Dr. Hemmings?
Yes, thank you,
she's-
Deb.
you are.
Gina, that's
Yeah.
Gina, thank you.
Yes.
And
Nice to see you today.
thank you, Bruinsma. Always enjoy hearing from you. Very sober and consistent voice in Adventism. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to, just only this morning, I was teaching or leading, I should say, Sabbath school lesson from the quarterly on Hebrews, where the memory text is based on Hebrews chapter 1, the first chapter, where God in these last days has revealed himself through his son and so forth and so on. And looking at the whole question of last days, and rightly, as you noted, for them, that was the last days. Messianic expectation was an eschatological expectation. It was last days. And I think what we need to understand, and I believe that was a focus in the last piece I did for the coming, the journal coming up for Adventist today. But when people become apocalyptic, often when there's crisis, and with apocalyptic literature sort of emerge from times of crisis. And it is a sort of, in the first place, it's like political commentary on what is going on. And that started from around when the Jews were under Syrian rule and the Syrian brutality and the very heinous acts of Antiochus Epiphanes. And we see that from there, we see Jewish apocalyptic coming forth. And again, we see the Roman Empire and the brutality of the Roman Empire that again gave rise to Revelation, Daniel, Revelation, these two major pieces of Judeo-Christian apocalyptic rising from that. And we must understand that these were coming from times of duress when they had no other way of dealing with the suffering than to hope that it is going to come to an end very soon. That's really what it was about, and it has been about, that it must come to an end. This must be the end. And so, as you rightly say, Bruinsma, is that you could always find these all these signs we're saying are the signs of the end. We could find them from thousands of years back. If we go back, we see them repeated over and over and over again. And we're interpreting them as signs of the end. But the point I really want to make is this. Oftentimes when we're going through suffering, when we're going through times of distress and confusing times, when there seems to be no way out, we tend to think that the only way out is that God should come and burn everything down. All right. And at some point, we have to give people a better way to hope, a better way to understand and to make sense of suffering and to make sense of what is going on in the world. Because when we see these things happening in the world, both as an institution and as individual, and all we want to think of is God must come and burn it down and tear it down, rather than look within ourselves and say, how have I contributed to this problem? And how can I do something to make this world a better place? Now, I'm not saying the world will not come to an end. I don't know. It's a long time we've been waiting for it. But the point is, somehow, just as the early church reinterpreted the concept of Messiah, we now have to reinterpret the concept of last days and see last days as the now, as the call of God upon us, all right, to be part of the solution in the world, rather than look to God to come and clean it up with fire and brimstone. That's my point today. I'm just making the point, Reinder.
Yeah, and that, I think that is an important addition, and I'm glad that you're saying that. And that was, in fact, already mentioned by one of the speakers, saying that we should not just look at the future, but realize that Christ was giving the example of being very much involved with the here and now,
Yeah.
rather than only looking towards the future.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Olive.
I'm going to ask Bob Martin to unmute. Bob, what would you like to say this morning?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma. It's a beautiful, really thoughtful presentation. Dr. Hemmings touched on a number of things I was going to ask about. So I'll go straight to my question, which is that, that being said, in terms of the point that Dr. Hemmings made, could it be that Adventism has held on to this end time eschatological apocalypse doctrine in order to keep the faithful together and keep the faithful motivated to maintain cohesion in the religion, in the religious beliefs. And my second question is, comparatively speaking, I know certain fundamentalists like us and the two other fundamentalist groups, they may have this type of belief, but fundamentally, at least comparatively speaking, are there other belief systems that do not have this type of apocalyptic eschatology as part of their central religion? What do the other religions? How do they treat the issue of end time? Do they have this type of end time apocalyptic doctrine?
Well, I think there are others in the group that could answer that very effectively, but my reaction would be that, of course, the second coming is a doctrine that most Christian churches, if not all Christian churches, have in their creed or in their confession of faith. In many of them, it doesn't really function in a very prominent place. Now, also here, I feel that we need to strive for balance. I believe that it's part of our heritage, part of our history, that the Advent, the second coming, is a prominent aspect of our belief system, and I hope we will keep that. But where things have gone, I think, astray is that we have composed a scenario of end time events that actually some of the aspects of that look less and less logical. And we still try to push that. And I think that does not help. And that gives confusion, that creates polarization. Some people wanting to throw out everything, others just trying to keep to every letter and every little piece of that end time scenario. So if we could forget about some of that end time scenario where we have a schedule, what will come next, and we'll have a time of trouble, and then we'll have this, and then we'll have that, and we'll have a shaking, etc. You name it. Some of it is very difficult to actually support from the Bible. It is mostly coming from a particular interpretation of some of the writings from Ellen White, and the interpretation is often extremely creative. But once you have it, and once you have it set in concrete, it seems to be very difficult for many people to let go of it. But I think it would help if Adventism could be more in the middle in terms of underlining the value, the importance of the second coming, without having this whole idea as to how it will develop and what will happen, because that is, I think, not very attractive to many of our members today, because they don't recognize it in what is happening around them. And it is actually scaring many of them as well, which makes the second coming not a blessed hope, but some terrible event that is going to happen.
I appreciate you saying that. I noticed that one of our earlier speakers talked about when he was a child fearing the second coming, and I've heard that many Adventists see it as a fearful event. So I want to challenge our group that here today and just ask that if we continue to believe in the second coming, but want to shift our focus, what would it be? What would you want to emphasize in the Adventist church? I'm going to go to Steve Siciliano. You don't have to answer that question, but you've been unmuted. So go ahead and share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, good afternoon. So sorry, I'm overdressed again. I just came back from my church. I was driving for most of Reinder's presentation. I was interested in one of the things you said right at the beginning about Berkhauer, how he said that, I'm just paraphrasing now, there's nothing inherent in the sign itself except as it is interpreted or as it is seen by faith.
Mhm.
So now, that means if there's nothing inherent in the sign itself, except as people perceive it a certain way, that means the sign itself has no meaning. It doesn't amount to anything. If people have been seeing all of these signs for the last 2,000 years and saying, okay, we see in this event the second coming, and the second coming never materialized, then what that tells me is that their interpretation of the event, even if we call it an interpretation of faith, was not valid. It was an invalid thing. I can't think of a great example, a parallel example, but let's say earthquakes. They have seismographs. Maybe a geologist could see that, the needle started to move. That means there's going to be an earthquake, and the earthquake actually happens. Or a meteorologist, they can see something forming over the Pacific, and they know that that's a sign that there's going to be a storm in the Sierras, and the storm actually happens. But if you have so many of these alleged signs that people perceive by faith, quote unquote, and then they never happen, then they were never signs in the first place. And what was actually happening is the faithful were misinterpreting it. So I understand what your point is. Your point is that for those people at that time, it gave them hope, but it was really a false hope. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like they were seeing ghosts. That's the first thing I want to say. And then the other one, I'll leave very short because I see two professors coming up after me. If you go back and read Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, it seems pretty clear to me that all of these things that we call signs, Jesus was actually saying, no, those are not signs. Don't worry about them. They're always going to be happening. So that's the second point. But again, my first point is we can't just say that they're signs to the faithful if nothing ever happens. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would
Reinder,
suggest
would you like to respond?
I would suggest that we hear from a few other people, and then I'll respond more in general.
Charles Keating, you're up next. Can you unmute, please? Thank you. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just an observation and, then sort of a question. It seems, it's almost part of our human nature to be obsessed with signs because, if you look through the history of the Bible, you look at the story of Gideon and others, they always wanted signs. They always seem to want, some direction of what was happening. But I'm wondering, does our seeming obsession with signs actually serve a useful purpose, or can it serve a useful purpose? And I'm thinking of the story of Ernest Shackleton and the Voyage of Endurance. The story of Shackleton. He went on an Antarctic expedition, lost his boat, got his men off the Antarctic to a place called Elephant Island, and then sailed, he and two other men sailed to South Georgia to get help. But yet all the men that were left, and, every day they did a stow and go drill. They prepared for him coming. They had people, looking out in all directions for a sign that their rescue was coming. And some attribute those drills to actually keeping those men alive for those months that they had to live on this rock, boiling bones and living off seaweed. So I'm just curious, is there any use to this? Is it something, are they something that seem to keep us going?
Well,
do you want to hear another question or answer at this time, Dr. Bruinsma?
No, let's have some more voices. I'm just saying that of course the example of Shackleton is so fascinating. But I've always used it as an example of great leadership, because Shackleton actually did not reach his goal. But nonetheless, he is one of the great examples of what a leader can do in leading the people along. But
Yeah, they didn't lose a person.
No.
That was the amazing thing. But again, I'm just, I was thinking about that, and I said, well, do they serve some benefit? Maybe that's a question that's a little counter current to what most people believe, but I need to be enlightened.
Okay.
Dr. Turner, let's hear what you have to say.
Yes, I just want to make 2 or 3 very quick, very quick points. But the main one is that it still amazes me and somewhat disturbs me that we continue to misinterpret passages when it's clear that that's what we're doing, because it maintains the tradition in some ways. So let me just give you some examples of what I'm talking about. As in the days of Noah, and the number of times I've heard people start that, as what was going on in the days of Noah? Well, they were eating and drinking, they were drunkards and gluttons. Well, when you read it in context, of course, it's nothing of the kind. It is that they are doing what we did today. In fact, I've looked at some people here, and they've been eating and drinking while Adventist today has been, in progress. And nobody is condemning people for that. Jesus means life continues as it always has. The point is the second coming will take people by surprise, which of course raises the question about these, about signs telling you precisely when he's coming, if it's going to be a surprise. Another example at the end of Daniel, where it says that knowledge will be increased. Well, just about everybody today understands that, quite rightly, I'd say, to be understanding of or knowledge of the book of Daniel, not sewing machines or televisions. And then the imagery about the sun being darkened, the moon being turned to blood, the stars of the heavens falling. This occurs in the Old Testament too, to describe the fall of Babylon. So this is imagery, biblical imagery, setting out, but it's imagery to describe a catastrophe. The end of the status quo is happening. Not that there will be a literal dark day on one day of the year in New England. Now, I was talking on another topic, but it's along the same kind of lines once, to a group of pastors and evangelists. And I gave what I thought was one of, the great triumphs of my ministry, where I showed that our understanding of interpreting this verse was need to be completely revised. And there'd be a revival of primitive godliness in the church if only we did that, And an evangelist stood up and he said, I see what you mean. He said, and you've actually convinced me. You've actually convinced me that that's the meaning of the verse. But I'm going to continue using the old interpretation because it works. It gets people in the baptistry. And that raises for me not just questions of exegesis, but questions about ethics as well. Anyway,
That's a good point.
I'll leave it there.
Yes.
Dr. Johnston, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, well, I like
Go ahead.
can you hear me? I like most of what's been said. Reinder's presentation was very sensible and balanced, and I like what Dr. Turner just said. I think the problem of classic Adventism was that they used a proof texting type of biblical interpretation and didn't pay attention to, or didn't know maybe, some of the rules of sensible exegesis that we know now. One issue, at least it used to be an issue, is the meaning of this generation in Matthew 24:34. And I remember when I was a young Adventist that people were trying to figure out how old somebody who was born before 1844 would be at that time. But of course, everything, with the exception of the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, everything, all the signs in Matthew 24 were fulfilled during the 40 years between the Olivet Discourse and the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which for Jews at that time really was a traumatic and apocalyptic ending, the destruction of the temple. Everything happened. Everything was fulfilled already in those 40 years, including the preaching of the gospel in all the world. As I think somebody explained on the I think Reinder, on the basis of Colossians 1:23 and a number of other verses we could show what ecumene meant. It didn't mean the world globe. It meant the world known to the Jewish people. Everything was already fulfilled by AD 70. I think one thing I would say on the other side is, when these things continue to happen, and most of them are catastrophic, when these things continue to happen, we see that during the 2,000 years since the time of Christ, there hasn't been any real progress, moral or any other way. The only, what we've had is acceleration. No real progress. Human beings are just as foolish and wicked as they always were. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
I was just watching a program a couple nights ago called The Last Days about the Holocaust and man's inhumanity to man. And it's kind of hard to go beyond that and say something worse has to happen before we get God's attention. I'm going to go to John Doe and ask you to unmute. And I'm lowering your hand here. If you could share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Reinder, for your presentation. Very well balanced. Before I make a comment, I have a question for you. Because you are an expert in the Catholicism. I was searching what is the teaching of Second Coming in Catholicism years ago. I couldn't find much on that one. Do they believe in Second Coming?
The Roman Catholics, sure,
Right.
believe. They certainly believe in the second coming. It is not as prominent as it is in our tradition, but they subscribe to the second coming. Of course, their system of interpreting prophecy, what leads up to it, that is not like ours. They do not subscribe to the historicist approach and everything that goes with it. But that they believe that this order is coming to an end and that the kingdom of Christ will come and replace it. They certainly do.
I think I must go back to their catechism again, because I was reading their catechism years ago, trying to find out, trying to learn what they believe about second coming. But I maybe need to go back and for the signs of the times. I think because we understand the second coming as a catastrophic event. As we read the Bible, when the second coming is described, there are catastrophic events accompanied the second coming. So for many years, I was thinking that when we are looking at the some catastrophic moments in our lives, we tend to connect it to second coming. I mean, those catastrophes are reminders for the second coming. I understand in a way. I don't understand that any catastrophic event, this day or that day, will just tell me that Christ's second coming is right around the corner. But it has been reminding people about the catastrophic nature of the second coming, and second coming itself is coming. Sometime we don't know. The Bible also, Jesus was talking about somehow he hinted that it would be soon, but when he said soon, it can be not very soon to our calculation. I feel that way. So thank you for your good summary of this signs and trying to help us to understand it in a better way. Thank you.
I'm going to go to either Jean or Jean and ask you to unmute, please.
It's
All right,
okay.
I'm lowering your hand and asking you to share your ideas with us today.
Oh, yes, it's Jean, but you can call me Jane. That's okay. Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma, for this great presentation. We're discussing signs and time, or time of the end, and that brings me to the book of Hebrews, where we find that Christ has entered into the most holy place to be beside the Father. More than once, the writer used the past tense or the perfect tense. It seems like by the time the book was written, Christ was already beside the Father in the most holy place. But I have learned so many years ago, over 40 years, that Christ entered into the most holy place in a much later date. So we'll say 1844. So the writer of the book of Hebrews, the writer did not use the future tense, but the past tense or the perfect tense. Now, my question is, if our doctrines could be updated or revised, what would happen to the church? Thank you.
Okay. Maybe at this point, I should, if I may, say a few things.
I'd appreciate that.
Let me first of all come back to one of the things that was said, and I forgot the name of the person.
Jean.
Yeah, no, but a little earlier, there was the statement that really, if nothing happens, but it's just our perception that something happens, then it loses all meaning. And that was in reference to the statement made by Professor Berkhauer and also by Professor Rice. And I can see what you mean by saying that, but a sign does not necessarily have to be a spectacular sign or something that is supernatural. It can be an event, it can be an occurrence, even that is perfectly natural. But when it happens at a particular moment, it can be perceived as something very, very special. And I think we have had that all in our own lives also, that something happens and you see meaning in that event, or that maybe the people around you don't see. No, I think it still is meaningful that things happen all through the ages, all through history, and whether they are supernatural or natural, they remind us that something is going to happen. Christ is going to come eventually. But my whole purpose has been to say, well, let's not each time when something happens say, this is the event, and now it's going to happen next month or next year. But the signs are given to us all through the ages to remind us that we are moving in a particular direction. Now, many people will not see that. They will not interpret the signs like that. But as believers, also on the basis of what Scripture says, that things do happen and they point in a certain direction. So on that basis, we can say that they confirm our faith in what is going to come. Now, the last speaker on Jean or Jean on Hebrews. Well, right now, of course, in the regular Sabbath school classes, there is the discussion this quarter on Hebrews. And I haven't looked at the quarterly to see what position they take, but I'm almost sure that there is the traditional position that Jesus Christ entered the heavenly sanctuary in 1844. And I'm sure that in many of the Sabbath school classes, an argument will be put forward to saying, well, actually, the Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, suggests that Christ entered the heavenly sanctuary on his ascension. Now, if you want to know what I believe that is the right interpretation. But not everybody will agree with me. And this will continue to be, well, what shall I call it? Well, to say the least, is a hot issue. And are we willing to reinterpret some of the doctrines, to reinterpret this particular doctrine? It's very difficult for any denomination to do that. But most likely, I think that we will follow more or less the practice that you can see, for instance, in Roman Catholicism. If you don't believe anything anymore, then you simply don't talk about it anymore. And I would think, but I may be wrong, but I think that probably we are going to talk less and less about the traditional position, and that will gradually get into the background. Of course, there will be groups that will find that difficult to accept and that will try to cling to whatever traditional doctrine we have had.
I'm going to go to Frank. I've asked you to unmute. I've been following you in the chat. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma, for your presentation. And I think what's been impressing me as, you know, listening to people talk and following the chat, and what's impressed me is that, you know, Adventism is rooted in a highly sign-based apocalyptic worldview. And I like what you said about having balance in this, but it struck me like the idea of if an ox is stuck on the side of the road in a ditch, you have to go to the other side of the road to get the ox back into the center. And the story that keeps coming to my mind from the Gospels is in Luke 17, where there were Pharisees who came to Jesus and said, what are the signs of the coming kingdom? And Jesus says to them, the kingdom of God doesn't come with your careful observations. The kingdom of God, and I think the translation is accurate, is in your midst. It's among you. And the subsequent things that Jesus says in that passage shows people in the days of Noah, people in the days of Lot being blind to what God was doing. And Jesus was saying to them, you're looking for signs in all the wrong places. The kingdom of God is already present. The king was there. And in his work of healing, his work of restoration, of including the excluded, that was the sign of God's work in the world and God's reign in the world. And they were missing it because they were looking for heavenly and political signs. And this sounds very familiar to the Adventism I came up in. And, we become so apocalyptically minded, so to speak, that we miss that where that kind of work is happening in the world, where people are doing that work for others. That's where God is. That's where his kingdom is right now. And then when I think of then the balance of if there's the not yet, all the signs that Jesus gives in chapters like Matthew 24 or Mark 13, but especially Matthew 24, because that's the favorite go-to. I agree. Those are more non-signs to me, what Jesus is saying. This is the present condition of things. When you hear of all these things, don't be shaken, he's saying. So I think those signs are not so much, they can point to like birth pains to what's to come. But Jesus is constantly saying, you don't know when it's going to come. So what's the point of trying to conjecture that? And they're also reminders of what is, that we live in a world of upheaval, of chaos, where sin and death are still powerfully present. And it's a reminder that our hope lies beyond this world, and that we can be part of God's project to restore the world in whatever little or big way we can do now, and leave the timing to God and not be preoccupied. I've seen that word used in the chat. Not be preoccupied with the timing. That's in God's hands, not ours. So that's what I had, my 2 cents that I had to add.
Okay. Well, it's of course one of the disappointing things of being the speaker and having to answer questions that you cannot follow really what is happening in the chat. So when I see it's 99 plus things in the chat, I just wonder what you're all saying to one another. But apart from that, yes, thank you for pointing that out. But again, here is the balance that is needed. The kingdom of God is not just future. The kingdom of God is among you. But while it is among us, its full consummation is also future. So it's those things that that we must keep in balance, and often we don't have the balance. And Adventism has been in danger and still is in danger. Major segments of Adventism are still in danger of almost looking only to the future and put down a trajectory to the future instead of realizing that the kingdom of God is in us, among us, and that demands a response from us.
I'm going to go to Ed and ask you to unmute. Ed Zerkwitz, lower your hand. If you could go ahead and let us know what you're thinking about this.
Yes, thank you, Reinder, for this, at least myself and most older Adventists, I guess. Interesting topic about what the future holds for us in these so-called last days or latter days. And I'm not going to be talking or addressing last generation. Also, I want to start by reading this letter, part of a letter dated November 11th, 2021, from the Southwestern Union. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but it's written to the North American Division, and it says, in light of prophetic understanding, we formally request that the North American Division and the Office of General Counsel review the OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard and consider the conflicts it presents with beliefs and practices of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We strongly believe that the mandates as prescribed in the OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard violate the freedom of conscience and personal choice of our employees and members. Furthermore, it is our belief that the Church should not be the enforcer of government policy, as we believe in the steadfast adherence to the Seventh-day Adventist Church principles of separation of church and state. And it goes on a bit more about that. However, I don't want to address this whole vaccination thing as, well, these vaccines are wrong and everything like that. You know, I'm not going to address that at all. I'm not going to address whether people should be pro or anti-vax. I want to address the mark of the beast question and this idea of whether we can buy or sell in the latter days. And what's been happening, certainly in Canada, where I live, and from what I see elsewhere in the world, is people are being coerced to be vaccinated or lose their jobs. In other words, the outcome for millions of people around the world is that they cannot buy or sell, or to some degree they cannot buy it or sell. And also the freedom of choice is being coerced away from them. And I don't see this really being addressed in the Seventh-day Adventist Church context until I saw this letter from 2 months ago. And, you know, is it something that, well, when we look at the character of God, if we are afraid, that's not from God. Fear does not come from God. But these mandates and restrictions, again, I want to emphasize, I'm not against people getting vaccinated. I'm not against that at all. What I'm saying is that the coercion aspect of it, the fear that's been created, some may say this is a perfect cover for last day events, as Seventh-day Adventists have, or some of them have come to believe. So I'll leave that with you there.
Well, my initial reaction would be that this is actually a perfect example as to how we should not think. Because something is happening and we say, this is a sign, now it's all going to come to a climax. And that is a type of reasoning that we have used so many times, and we have seen that it really worked out differently. And personally, this whole matter of coercion, I must say that I really don't understand what people mean. I am being coerced by my government in many, many different ways, and it's a good thing. And I think there are many things in your life where you're coerced by your government and you don't even think about it, and it's a good thing. We have this terrible pandemic worldwide. We are still sitting in a lockdown here in the Netherlands. It's being a little bit relaxed as of today, but still the governments have to come to some kind of solution in order to help us beat this pandemic. Now, if they have to coerce some sections of society, some individuals, in order to be sure that they get the pandemic under control, that is probably inevitable. And you can agree, you can disagree, but to see it as something that has to do with the time of the end, I think that is not something that appeals to me, that kind of reasoning. Also, I should say that the traditional point of view that we have had with regard to the mark of the beast is that it has to do, of course, with the Sunday. And now it seems we are switching to some other explanation. Something is happening here with the I hear the voice of the computer of Afia, of my wife, coming back. So, okay, so it's been taken care of. So here's a switch in our understanding of what the mark of the beast actually could be. That in itself is interesting, that that kind of reinterpretation can happen. Well, maybe that's as much as I want to say about this.
I'll go to our next person, Cherry Ann. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Where are you today, Cherry Ann?
I am back in Barbados.
Ah, oh yeah, yeah.
Give us a Barbadosian point of view.
Well, it will be a Jamaican point of view. Because that's home for me. But I've often thought of the text in 1 Corinthians 15 that says, if in this world or in this life only we have hope, we are of all men most miserable. And I've always thought of that as hoping for the world that is to come. But as I listen to Dr. Hemmings and, speaking about what we can do now, I'm wondering if maybe our focus should be on how can I make this world better so that somebody else doesn't have to live in this type of world that makes them miserable. And I wanted your thoughts on that, rather than consistently looking at the signs and saying, Jesus is coming, the world will be destroyed, a better world is to come. Looking at the signs and saying, this is my call to action to do something different. And I think about even climate change, because that directly impacts the work that I do. What can I do to slow the process or to help other people adapt? So I welcome your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think that is a very valid comment, and I really have can only say that I agree with that. Thank you.
I remember when I was attending Lauren's Palo Alto Adventist Church years ago, thinking I really wasn't getting as much out of it as I hoped to. And then realizing that it was really up to me to step up and make the church a better place. It's like, not what could the church do for me, but what could I do to make the church a more welcoming and better place for others? And maybe that's what you're trying to say, Cherry Ann. It's like, what can I do? What can I do in the world? What can I do in my community? And goes back to my question of challenge of if I was interested in Dr. Turner's comments about, this is what works in marketing the church or in evangelism. But if we deviate from that model of trying to scare people, or maybe that's not the intent, but motivating people to take action now at the time of the end, what would be another thing that could market the church and make it where people, we couldn't fill, there was no room in the pews because people were so desperate to get into the Adventist church because we're known for ? I'm going to go to Lauren and ask him if he would go ahead and maybe answer that question or share some other thoughts with us that he's been having.
20 years later, the truth comes out, Dr. Bruinsma. Now she tells me she didn't get that much out of church when I was her pastor. It took 20 years to come out and admit it.
I think that's a misinterpretation, but anyway.
Okay, but coming back to what Dr. Turner said, and by the way, it's great to see him because, I have really great respect for him and for his thinking. He is one of the best preachers, in my view, that we have in the church. But apart from that, his statement that he said, it works. Yes, I've heard other evangelists also saying that, well, maybe that might not be the right kind of exegesis, but it works. Sadly enough, it really doesn't. It only works for a small group of people. But we will have to find, as you say, other arguments that really tell the people that, you know, these guys, these Adventists, they have something that is worth following. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask a pastor's question. I'm going to ask the question as though you are my conference president, Reinder. You have been a conference president. Raj Adikan is also here. He was my conference president. I'm going to try to pull him into this discussion. But I think I think a lot of us have kind of really put you on the spot here today, pushing pretty hard on this matter of the subjectivity of the signs and whether in the long run they help us to hope for Jesus' rescue or actually discourage us in some way. What has worried me, Reinder, is what I call the spectacularization of the events around us, where everything is exaggerated and everything that comes along, from vaccines to some law that lets churches take government money, or everything that might be interpreted as, you know, the Pope comes out and says, I want all my people to go to church on Sunday. And everybody says, there's the Sunday law right there. The Pope is making this, you know, this spectacularization that just goes on, exaggeration, this making everything into something much more than it is. And while we can speak of things like Sunday laws as having been fairly persistent in our teaching, a lot of these other things, Reinder, come and go very quickly. You know, Doug Batchelor jumps on and says, I just heard the Pope say this. And everybody gets alarmed and sends him $100,000. And, you know, 2 years later, nobody's talking about it. 6 months later, nobody's talking about it. So back to my question. And the question I have for all of you who have directed pastors like me. I wasn't, I never had the ability to move up into conference administration. I was a rank and file guy. If I come to you as my conference president and I say, in light of what you've told me, Dr. Bruinsma, and how I interpret what you've written here, how do you want me to, as the pastor, preach the time of the end? How do you want me as a pastor to do evangelism? What are the components that are going to go into being a vigorous soul winner? And better yet, a vigorous church congregation builder. You see, that's the kind of question as a pastor that bothers me. I mean, I made my own way, Reinder. I figured out my own way of doing things, but I was in the minority probably among a lot of pastors in how I would go about that. So I'm really putting you on the spot here. I'm a employee of this institution. I'm a pastor out pastoring some churches. My churches are saying, Pastor, show us how to evangelize. And I turn to you and say, what is it going to mean, Elder Bruinsma, for me to evangelize in an ethical and theologically defensible and psychologically defensible way? I'll just add this as a postscript. I was one of those children who had the hell scared out of them as a child about the Catholic neighbors who were coming over to persecute me. And I determined as a young pastor, I would never, ever say those things to people. And I never have. But it has been the component of some of the preaching of some of the evangelists I have hosted in my churches through the years.
Well, you are putting me on the spot. And what am I going to say? Well, first of all, my last assignment as a employee, still in underemployment, not retired before my last assignment, was being the union president of the Netherlands Union.
Mhm.
And I told my pastors that I would really be very careful in giving them any advice about how they should do their work, because I was one of these administrators, and we have many of them nowadays, who really have done very little pastoral work themselves. And so before they should tell everybody else how they ought to be careful before they start doing that. That's one point. So I would be reluctant. Then I think I would try to encourage in workers' meetings and in other forums that we could openly talk about these things, and that pastors would feel secure. They could speak their mind, and they could disagree, and they could have doubts without that having any repercussions. And then I think I would try to be consistent in what I was preaching and saying myself, and maybe showing a little bit that there are certain ways you can think and you can talk about these things. And then maybe lastly, I would emphasize, and in fact, I've done that, and I think it's even more important now, that in the milieu in which we find ourselves today, much of the evangelism that we have used, the tactics or whatever you call it, don't function, don't work. But you need to create a community in which people feel welcome as they are, and where they have freedom to think and to talk. And that is the kind of most effective way of growing the church, evangelism, whatever word you want to use. But it certainly is a difficult thing, and you will have certain pastors who are going about it in ways that you really don't like. That's true.
Yeah.
And that can be a difficult thing, how to deal with them. And in particular, when they feel that their president is really too relaxed about certain things, or even, a bit on the liberal side.
I think I induced my conference president here to join us. I asked Raj to unmute because I want to know how those of you from offices see us going forward on this. You have given us, in many ways, executive direction, but your executive direction, as Reinder, as you said, fades over into theological direction. So Raj, what kind of direction are you going to give us?
Well, the easy answer is to say, I would say exactly what Dr. Bruinsma said. That would be my easy answer, but leave it to Lawrence Seibold to ask the tough question as a pastor. Yeah, well, I've struggled with this issue of evangelism and what we say and do. And I think, as Reinder mentioned a while ago, what we are doing, what we have done, and how we have interpreted the signs as a way of trying to motivate people to quickly jump ship and join us really hasn't worked. It has appealed to a small group of people. It has appealed, I think, from what we know, to people who already have a mindset of conspiracies and want, want some kind of an interpretation that is kind of way out. So we cannot say that it works, and therefore let's keep using it. I think our birth story has handed to us a sort of a compulsion to keep talking about the Advent and the signs of the Advent. And I don't know how we grow out of it, Lauren, but what I have tried to do is to hold space for pastors to work in their own armor and not feel like they're compelled to say some things or interpret some things a certain way. Whether that worked or not, you are a better judge. So that's how I would say it. No, I would not insist that we keep perpetuating what I think has not really worked, and challenge pastors to find ways of speaking to this that are more relevant and perhaps more accurate. Now, another, if I can throw another question while I'm at it, at Dr. Bruinsma, and that is, I've been quite impressed with N.T. Wright's explanations, interpretations of various things. And as you may know, he talks about repeatedly of heaven and earth coming together, heaven and earth coming together at creation, heaven and earth coming together at the cross, and even the Advent. He kind of talks about it in terms of heaven and earth coming together. Not so much the way we typically interpret this as heaven's opening up, the angels coming, Jesus coming in the clouds. I'm just curious how you, Dr. Bruinsma, take that. Do you see any merit in N.T. Wright's way of describing the what we call the Advent?
Yeah, I see some merit in the sense that when I think about how it's going to happen in the traditional view with angels and everything that goes with it, then I find that difficult to visualize. I find it difficult to grasp how that is going to take place, how I even find it attractive. Do I like it? Well, the former Pope, he wrote an interesting book about these aspects, and he really says that we should think about heaven as a different dimension rather than a place. And I find that also an interesting thought. But then it's difficult not to think about a place. It's difficult not to think about something happening, on the basis of what I read in Scripture. So, N.T. Wright, I found his book on the resurrection a marvelous book. But these ideas that you're just sketching, yes, I find them interesting, but I really don't know how to think about the actuality of the second coming. I believe it's going to happen. And at this stage in my life, I really have no idea how I should think about it, how it's going to happen. It is going to happen. There is going to be a future. But what that future looks like and how it's going to break into the present, there are so many questions that it's in faith that we have to move forwards, but it's not on the basis of really knowing anything.
Thank you.
This has been an interesting conversation. It's taken us past our 12:30 breaking point. Typically, we have a benediction at 12:30, and then we stay around and chat until 1 for those who are interested. So I'm going to ask you to bow your heads with me now. Father in heaven, we thank you for this discussion, for challenging us to think of your second coming in different ways, acknowledging that it will happen, and maybe wondering how to approach it and how our church should approach it. We ask for a blessing on those of us who are here today. And thank you for an opportunity to share thoughts. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I'm gonna
Gina,
go to,
Gina, before we go into
yeah.
the last four hands, maybe while some people are still here, maybe Dr. Bruinsma, you can tell us where we're going to go next week, so we know what to anticipate.
Good thought, yeah.
We are going to next week to look at the specific question, how have signs been attached to and the expectation of the second coming to particular historic events, and how in the evangelical world in particular, it has been attached, for instance, to the establishment of the State of Israel. And how valid is it to look at that kind of connections, or, well, how should we deal with that? That is where we are going next week.
All right.
Thanks.
At least if that's okay.
That's interesting. That sounds good. I'm going to ask Ray Stovall or Bobby Stovall to unmute.
Well, I too was raised during the period of all evangelistic meetings were about end time events. I have no knowledge or remembrance of any of those meetings ever talking about the love of Christ.
True.
Now, it may have happened, but the predominant thing was end time events and scary monsters showing up on the screen.
Yep.
So my question is, why does evangelism, or why did evangelism come to that point that was how you were to get people to follow Christ, by
scaring them half to death?
I never understood that, even though I went along with it. So when people say, well, what can we do different? How can we get people to understand that Adventism has something better? Well, why not borrow from a lot of the other churches, religions, like we did in the beginning, and get back to the message of Christ himself? John 3:16, and everything goes along with that. Why do we not just simply preach Christ first, second, and last? People want to ask about a future. We can say, yeah, there is a future. He is coming again. And then you can get into that. But I gave up listening to any evangelist decades ago because they still perpetuate it. And I even read a recent article in the review yesterday that was, again, along the same themes. Scare the crap out of everybody. Sorry, but that's the way I feel.
Yeah. Well, in all fairness, there are some who are trying to go a different route. And also in some of the books on Revelation that have recently been written, the language is quite different from what it used to be. But maybe the way we have approached apocalyptic and has also something to do with some of the roots of our movement. And in 18th, 19th century preaching, you know, hellfire was very prominent. And some of the ideas of the way we deal with apocalyptic were very much present. And so maybe we have inherited from these times through the Millerite movement and have been unable to shake that off, thinking that this is our special message. And if we tone that down, we are really compromising and we are not doing our job.
So what we need is a vaccination against this old style.
Yeah, a booster.
booster. All right, Arvidel, let's hear what you have to say.
Okay.
I'm asking you to unmute.
Yes, am I unmuted? I
Thank
should
you.
be unmuted. I should be unmuted. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can hear you.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Ray, I appreciated those comments about evangelism. And, you know, thinking about the vaccine issue too, if you hear, this is like a rule in medicine. It's a saying. If you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Right? So when I hear the hoofbeats, and I've been the religious liberty leader for our church for over 20 years. And there are people in our church now like, oh no, we're not going to get vaccinated. And especially, oh no, the government is forcing people to get vaccinated and so forth. But, you know, we kind of went through this a little bit with seatbelts in the United States. There was a lot of reaction. The government can't tell me what to do, all that. And then it was also with motorcycle helmets. I think Indiana is one of the few states, if maybe the only state in the United States, that does not have a helmet law. But most states do. So the government can tell you to do some things. I mean, you don't have to do it, but you know, there will be consequences if you don't do it. And the public health department does have the right to quarantine you and so on. You know, there are certain powers that you know, sort of have to deal with. I don't see it as a religious liberty issue. Religious liberty, as far as the church is concerned, is about your right to worship. Anyone's right to worship as their conscience tells them. But that doesn't really carry over to vaccinations. And something that I know people say, well, this is different than seatbelts because this is something, you know, you have to put in your body. And there may be some legitimate medical exemptions for a vaccination, but what I find among the fringe Adventists is there is no consideration for other people who may be immunocompromised or the children, the cradle roll children in the church. There's no care for them. They can't be vaccinated. They can't be protected, and they're quite vulnerable. So yes, I think that we need to maybe educate our people a little differently, because every time there are people that just, well, the government's telling me to do something. So, you know, it's got to be a sign of the end of time. And they rebel against it instead of seeing it as their opportunity for community service.
I wanted to just make a comment to Lauren about my earlier comment about what could I do in church. It was more addressed to the needs of my children, and my solution was to start teaching children's Sabbath school, just to reassure him on that point. I'm going to ask Dr. Johnston.
I was only ribbing you a bit. Please forgive me.
No, I know, but I want to make sure you're not staying up all night worrying about this. So, Dr. Johnston, go ahead.
Yeah, some of the most latest part of our conversation was a good sequel to Dr. Fortin's presentation a week or so ago. How should Adventists present themselves to the world, especially in an evangelistic way? Why should we invite people to become Adventists? What do we have to offer that many other churches don't have to offer? There are two tracks in Adventism, you might say. One is symbolized by the evangelistic tent, and the other is symbolized by the medical hospital. And of course, we should preach Christ, but which Christ? The apocalyptic prophet or Christ the healer? I think even the secular world recognizes that Adventists have had something to offer in the area of lifestyle. Maybe we should emphasize that a little bit more. is our job to warn people or to give them hope? Adventist is still part of our name. I think Sabbath is a good symbol of the healing side, but we also have Adventist as part of our name, and I don't think we can get rid of it. But do we preach the Advent with an emphasis on hope or as warning? Now, I have to admit that fear and anger move people more than gentler motivations. And in recent months, the last year in the United States shows how powerful fear and anger can be in moving people to do things. And even on the healing side, I think the old film on 1 in 20, was it 1 in 20,000 about smoking, was a pretty powerful instrument to get people to give up smoking. There is a place for fear and anger. They're real emotions. But I suggest that maybe the way forward is to put more emphasis on the healing side than on the apocalyptic warning side. I don't know how the rest of you think about that.
Thank you.
I appreciate that comment. And I also think that our education system is something that the Adventist Church does very well. And some statistics that are interesting are how many students who graduate from Adventist academies or high schools end up going to college as opposed to public colleges or other parochial colleges. And I think that's a very positive thing of Adventism. I'm going to go to Ed Reichschneider and ask you to unmute and share your thoughts with us.
I am pondering what the takeaway might be from today's session, which has been very stimulating. So if I want to be a good Adventist, I don't know whether to put good in quotes or not. If I want to be a good Adventist, would I be hunting signs? Should I stop looking for signs? Should I laugh when people mention, isn't the bad economy a sign, or isn't the pandemic a sign, or et cetera, et cetera? How should I relate to the notion of signs as a 2021 Seventh-day Adventist? My tendency is to ignore the whole. My tendency is to ignore the whole subject, but that may not be right. I'm willing to be instructed.
I will say that in my life, there have been times where I have felt very close to God, and things that have happened in my life that I feel that have assured me of the presence of God. And I don't know if that's enough as far as pointing toward the great apocalyptic event, but it's enough to keep me going every day. And I liked what Cherry Ann and Dr. Hemming said about a life with hope. I think there's value to having a life with hope. Reinder, I'd like to hear your comments on this.
Yes, I think that is very important what you said, and I think that in answer to the last speaker, Ralph Schneider, yeah. I think the important thing is the perspective with which we look at things. And that is in the Adventist way of thinking. The perspective is, this is not the end. What we are seeing, all kinds of things are wrong. And a number of speakers, and in particular, Dr. Hemmings, have emphasized that it is not something that we must just accept, but there is also a mission that we have. There is a task that we have, a responsibility. But we approach things with a definite perspective. And that is how we place the signs, things that happen in the world, in the past, they have been meaningful to people. Things that happened in the past are meaningful to me now, saying, look, it's going to get better. I don't know when. We don't need to know when, but it's moving in a particular direction, and that gives hope. So yeah, that brings a number of things together, and the aspect of hope rather than fear, I think, is an aspect that we should take away from here.
It's 3:59. I love this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma, and all of you who participated. I can do no better at the end of this than once again quote Abraham Davenport, the Speaker of the Connecticut Legislature in 1780. The day of judgment is either approaching or it is not. If it is not, there is no cause for an adjournment. If it is, I choose to be found doing my duty. And that's where I stand. Bring candles and light them. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Thank you all very much, and blessings to you. I'm looking forward to next week, Dr. Bruinsma. We're gonna just keep putting you on the spot, man.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. But
God bless.
I'm far away, you know, so you really cannot hurt me.
God bless you all. Bye-bye. Happy
Thank you.
Sabbath.
Bye-bye.